Daamid ja härrad.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to introduce myself. My name is Toomas VITSUT, and I am head of the European Union Affairs Committee of the Estonian Parliament. I'm very glad to see all of you in Tallinn, and I have the honor of opening the 58th session of the plenary meeting of the Conference of Parliamentary Committees of the Union Affairs of Parliaments of the European Union. This gives us an excellent opportunity to discuss matters which are topical in the European Union. I hope that everybody who was able to participate at the dinner last night at the Seaplane Harbour were satisfied with the event and were able to have a relaxed chat with the colleagues. My special welcome goes to colleagues that are first-time participants of a COSAC conference. I welcome Ms. Plum, head of the European Union Affairs Committee from the Romanian House of Representatives, and her counterpart, Mr. Eriksson, from the Swedish Parliament. And now, colleagues, I am glad to give the floor to Mr. Eiki NESTOR, who will speak on behalf of the Estonian Parliament, and he is a member of Parliament with the longest track record in Estonia from our MPs. He served as a minister on 2 occasions. He's been the Minister for Regional Affairs and Minister for Social Affairs. Over to you, Eiki.
Tere hommikust, good morning. My welcome speech will be in Estonian. Lugupeetud parlamendiliikmed, ametnikud, daamid ja härrad.
Honorable colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this was a year of elections in Europe. This was a year during which we spoke a lot about extremism, about being anti-Europe, about violence, and also about using force to keep your borders and about spheres of influence. All of this has one common denominator. I wish to speak to you about a closed, open world. Closeness and openness, of course, are relative terms here, because previously, too, the world was ajar around us. The openness that we now know was brought to us by the gadgets that spread information to places that information did not reach before, through darkness, through silence. Many people the world over have benefited from this, but such a world is not something that people who thrived in darkness like. Openness threatens closedness with the loss of power, and this has made people in our neighborhoods active. Now that totalitarian regimes are crumbling, those regimes have to become active because they fear they will lose everything that they have. They are fighting with the open world not for land, not for territory, but for the control of minds, for remaining in power indefinitely. The open world must defend its openness. And the first victim here is the political presumption that the decision makers know more than those affected by their decisions. The government, parliaments, and political parties that work behind closed doors are history. We should forget them. In an open society, public authority has to be open as well, because we can no longer presume to know more than the people affected by our decisions. If we do not do that, we will continue to draw to be accused of lying, to be accused of muddying the waters. We will fare the best when we will find a functioning format of continuous cooperation. The rapidly moving information has also given a boost to markets. Unfortunately, economic globalization has not led to world peace. Weapons continue to be fired in the names of spheres of influence. The movement of markets is an even more bitter pill to swallow for those who have lost career certainty. It would be outrageous to try to placate these people with a lie that there are easy solutions. If a job has been taken over by a robot or has gone down the internet, then no one's going to bring it back into human hands. The search for culprits has turned up something that should actually have helped people to cope better. In the new openness, the great European powers and nations have acted alone. The integrated Europe is moving on at a snail's pace. For many people feel that the rain that falls on them is caused by somebody else, presumably Brussels. Both the anti-EU feeling and xenophobia rely on the fear of the open world. The open world has cut deep into the soul of tradition. Imagine yourself living in a society where centuries-old doctrine has been that the only thing you can see of a woman are her eyes. Anything more would be a crime. And now, no matter what information channel you open, horror and abomination hit you in a dozen different ways. For people who have lived with a firm faith, this is blasphemy, and those that have created it can only be seen as enemies of God. To conclude, let me remind you that we should not be surprised if the supporters of totalitarian empires, right and left-wing extremists, xenophobes, homophobes, openly or covertly find and support each other, because they have a common enemy, the open world. In a closed world, they could rely on the ignorance and fears of people. Now they are in trouble. I hope that you will keep that in mind today when discussing the future of European Union and topics related to digitalization, migration, security, and the role of parliaments. I hope that you will have a successful conference. Thank you for your attention and good luck.
Aitäh, Eiki, NESTOR. Head kolleegid.
Thank you, Eiki. Colleagues, before we move to adopting our program, let me give you a few bits of practical information. Firstly, our conference is web-streamed through our website. We are also sharing our conference mood through social media, through the Estonian Parliament's Facebook, Twitter, and Flickr accounts. You have on your desks an information sheet with details about translation, Wi-Fi, and also regarding your registering yourself as a speaker. To register your wish to speak, we have an electronic conference system which allows you to speak from your seat. To register your wish to speak, please press the button on your conference equipment. The button has an image of a head on it, and please do not press it a second time, because then you will remove yourself from the order of speakers, and your microphone will be switched on and off automatically. Let's move on to the next item in our agenda, which is adoption of the agenda. The initial program was already presented to you at the meeting of COSAC chairpersons. The latest version of the program has been sent out to you and also distributed to you. We're looking at 2 intense days of work, altogether 5 working sessions. The first session is dedicated to the future of the European Union. The second session is about how to communicate with the citizens about the European Union, how to spread best practices from parliament to parliament. The third session will be about the digital single market with the focus on the development of e-services. The fourth session will be about a sustainable security union, and the fifth session will be about the external dimension of migration and about how to prevent and combat irregular migration. As you can see from the program, I've also involved the Estonian members of the Estonian delegation as moderators of our sessions. In addition, during the lunch break today, at noon sharp, we will have a side event organized by Mr. Fabio Massimo Castaldo, Vice President of the European Parliament, in cooperation with Oudekki Loone, member of the Estonian delegation. And the event will be about e-democracy, digital solutions, to be placed at the service of democracy. Colleagues, you now have the opportunity to speak about the program if you have comments or suggestions. If not, then we can move on with procedural issues. Nobody wishes to speak, which means we can move on to procedural matters. Colleagues, I will tell you about the procedure, and then you will have an opportunity to speak. First of all, let me inform you that yesterday's Troika meeting decided to propose to COSAC chairpersons to approve Mr. Kenneth Kermi for the 2018-2019 period as a permanent member of the COSAC under Rule 9.3 of COSAC Rules of Procedure. According to that rule, the COSAC chairpersons approved the candidacy at the proposal of the Troika. Let's move on to the next item, which is introduction of the 28th biannual report of COSAC. And many thanks to the COSAC Secretariat for drawing up the report. I now give the floor to the permanent member of COSAC, Ms. Christiana Frida, who will speak to us about the conclusions of the report. Over to you.
The report consists of 3 chapters. According to the results of the first one on the future of the EU, the majority of parliaments have examined either in committee or in plenary both the Rome Declaration and the Commission's White Paper on the future of Europe. Migration and the refugee crisis, security issues, as well as social-economic inequalities are considered by parliaments as the current challenges faced by the EU. The vast majority of the respondents have expressed no opinion on possible changes to the EU treaties. The results of the second chapter on bringing the EU closer to its citizens show that the majority of parliaments have established action plans to ensure the involvement of citizens in EU-related matters. The majority of Parliament's EU affairs committees involve civil society in parliamentary debates by engaging both directly and passively with NGOs. EU affairs committee meetings are open to the public in almost all of the responding parliaments. Most parliaments hold debates on EU matters at the plenary at regular intervals or on an ad hoc basis. The third chapter presents the digitalization of parliamentary procedures and Parliament's discussions on the digital single market strategy. In nearly half of the respondents, voting during the plenary is conducted by electronic voting, while in the majority it is conducted by a show of hands in committee meetings. An electronic document management system is used by the vast majority of respondents. Most responding parliaments do not have a separate committee responsible for matters relating to digitalization. Digitalization of the public sector is nevertheless very important for most of the respondents. Creating the right environment for digital networks and services has been the most debated topic in parliaments. Thank you.
Tänan, proua Frieda.
Thank you, Ms. Frida. Next, let me tell you about the letters that we have received as the presidency. First of all, Andorra, Monaco, and Ukraine. The parliaments from these countries have expressed a wish to participate in COSAC, and I'm happy to welcome the representatives of the respective parliaments here. Secondly, the French Senate has addressed a letter to us in which they have relayed to us their report about the competitiveness of European Union, then they are ready to introduce it in our digital single market panel. Thirdly, we have received a traditional letter from the Visegrad countries in which, based on the COSAC programs, they present their opinions and proposals. And thank you for that. We were able to use it as input. Fourthly, to improve the IPEX platform and increase the synergy of the COSAC website, the Presidency Parliament and IPEX board have had an exchange of letters, and the results of that exchange have been presented to you in the COSAC conclusions. We also received a letter from the Irish Parliament in relation to the end of the mandate of the permanent member of COSAC. Sixth, the Portuguese National Assembly has addressed a letter to us explaining why they cannot participate at the COSAC, and the reason is the final vote on the national budget. Seventh, on 14th of November, we've received a letter from the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. In the letter, the Commission tells us that the European Commission has set up a task force on subsidiarity and proportionality and on doing less more efficiently. In the letter, the Commission asks COSAC to appoint 3 representatives to the task force by the end of the year. The task force is to begin its activities on January 1st, 2018, and to present its conclusions in July 2018. It's deplorable that the letter has been sent to us at such a late stage in the run-up to the COSAC conference. We discussed the letter in the Troika meeting, and we have, as a result, made a proposal that's on your desks. Colleagues, I promise to you that we will take this matter up also at today's meeting of COSAC chairpersons, and I should not like to spend more time on this now. Eighth, in relation to the previous letter, We've also received a letter from the French Senate, who has suggested their own candidate to participate in the task force. And all of these letters are also in your documents folder at your desks. We've reached the last procedural item, which concerns COSAC contributions and conclusions and the procedure for adopting these. On November 13, we transmitted to you the guidance material about the procedure, explaining how the Presidency Parliament intends to direct the work on contributions and conclusions of COSAC. The point of this guidance materials was to maximize the transparency of the procedure. On November 13, we also transmitted a draft text of contributions and conclusions, asking you to send in your proposals by November 20th. Based on the proposals we received, we introduced changes to the contributions and conclusions at yesterday's meeting. The drafts and the amending proposals are also on your desks. Should you wish to make any further suggestions for amendment of contributions and conclusions, then we would like to receive them by noon today, Estonian time. And the proposals have to be in writing. They can be submitted by email. The address is cosac@parliu2017.ee. Today at 4:30 p.m. we will have a meeting of the heads of European Union Affairs Committees, and we will work on the contributions and conclusions text, especially with paragraphs regarding which we will have received further suggestions by noon today. And colleagues, I stress that we will today only discuss those items on which additional suggestions have been received. The other paragraphs will be deemed closed. The aim is to reach an agreement on all paragraphs in our today's meeting of heads of committees, and the final approval to the contributions and conclusions will be for tomorrow. Colleagues, any further questions? No questions. Well, we do have a question. Richard Hojcik, please.
The floor, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I would like to inform you of the meeting of the Visegrad groups held in September in my constituency in Sárospatak. In this meeting, we had two main issues were on the agenda. First of all, the role of the national parliaments in the European Union, and second, the state of play of the Brexit negotiations and the possible impact of Brexit on the four fundamental freedoms. Mr. Chairman, we supported the idea to put the topic of Brexit negotiation regularly on the agenda of the COSAC meetings, so I am very delighted to see Monsieur Barnier, the chief negotiator, among today's keynote speakers. The adopted conclusion also proposed the discussion of maintaining the principle of the free provision of services with regards to the posting of workers directive and the mobility package. I express, Mr. Chairman, my hope that the incoming presidencies will also deal with these issues appropriately. Thank you very much.
Aitäh, ma tänan teid toetuse eest.
Thank you very much for your support. Colleagues, we have finalized the discussion of procedural issues and can now move on to our first session. I have to apologize. I will go and meet the president. Please remain seated. We will be back soon.
Head kolleegid.
Colleagues, in our first panel, first session, we will be focusing on how we would like to see the future of the European Union. The achievements of the United Europe in the last 60 years have been remarkable. However, Europe is also still facing a number of challenges. Despite being tested and tried, the EU has managed to stay true to its core values. The decision of the citizens of the UK to leave the European Union was a catalyst for discussions about the future of the EU. It is important that in these discussions we remain focused on the welfare and core values of European citizens. These have been the foundations of the EU so far. The Brexit also indicated that the EU needs to focus on the matters with a provable added value. It has to be great in great things and tiny in small things. A common understanding of the solutions for the challenges standing before Europe is the key to creating a cohesive Europe. Let me give you a short introduction to the speakers of this session. The first speaker is the President of the Republic of Estonia, Mrs. Kersti KALJULAID. The second speaker is the Chief Negotiator of Brexit, Mr. Michel BARNIER, and the third speaker is Ms. Danuta HÜBNER from the European Parliament. First of all, we will hear to the speakers. After that, the audience may take the floor for questions and comments, and finally I will give the speakers an opportunity to comment on the debate and answer questions. Colleagues, from this moment on, you may register your requests for intervention. You can do this electronically from your designated seat. Please use the conference unit in front of you. There is a button on it with an image of a head. Please push that if you wish to request the floor. There is also a guidance note on the table for you. As I said, you may take the floor for interventions after the speakers, and we will give you the floor once it's your turn. But now, I'm now glad to pass the floor to our first speaker, the President of the Republic of Estonia, Kersti KALJULAID. She was elected the President in 2016. Before that, from 2004 to 2016, she was a member of the Court of Auditors of the EU. She has also been an economic advisor to Estonian Prime Minister Mart Laar. She has been a member of the Estonian Genome Center, the Advisory Board of the University of Tartu, and Chairman of the Council of the University of Tartu. Please, President, you have the floor.
Mrs. HÜBNER, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you in Tallinn for the plenary meeting of EU's Parliament's EU committees. This is one of the biggest events of our EU Council presidency here in Estonia. In slightly more than a month, the active part of our presidency, first ever, has finished, and the people who have been engaged with the presidency both here in Estonia and in Brussels, they can finally relax a little bit and enjoy their Christmas holidays. I'm very grateful for their hard work, this has to be said. But of course we will remain firm supporters and cheerleaders for the next presidencies, Bulgaria and Austria, our trio partners. 184 days to solve all the challenges that Europe faces was not a long time, we have to say. It is not yet quite the time to look back to our ongoing presidency and draw final conclusions, but our overarching aim, breaking the ice of negativity about our union, this seems to be really happening, and we are very glad about it. The hard work on common security policy approach is reaping the results finally. The digital agenda has focused the minds of policymakers on the fact that the important part of our people's and our businesses' activities already take place online, and the governments have a certain obligation to facilitate and protect in the cyberspace. The 4 freedoms we enjoy in analog will be expanded into digital domain as well, while many countries experiment with different ways of service provision over internet. Finance Ministry officials have gathered during our Council presidency to look at the taxation consequences of such a digital change, where most interactions leading to transactions, purchases of goods and services, have already some part in cyberspace. We have sorted the Posted Workers Directive, but what exactly will we do with people who work in different countries and do this over internet? We have complained about companies headquartering in one country, acting in other. But what about digital nomads who will do the same as independent operators? Who will be their social security network provider? How will we tax their earnings? If all people check web doctors to understand their health anyway, how then to make sure that all over Europe they have good science-based tools to do so? Can Africa become a common market with whom Europe can trade and deal as a union? Can Europe cooperate with African Union and attack the root causes of the migration problem, otherwise known as brain drain in the African countries? Can some Eastern partners expect ever closer cooperation with European Union if their democratic processes continue to develop? These questions may or may not already have an answer, but they have come up during our Council presidency. And in the case of Africa, will come up in Côte d'Ivoire this week through different presidency-organized events, time and again. But, you know, these questions, they are not anymore these hand-wringing in despair about our European future questions. These are looking optimistically to our future questions. They are not problems. They are opportunities. Grasping these opportunities demands collective, yet flexible and relatively quick action. Hereby normally you would complain about difficult and long decision-making chains in Europe, but I don't do it. If we had to unify our continent based on something less than our European Union, something less than our pre-agreed procedures, it would definitely be impossible. I have seen also during our presidency that with high stakes, we actually come to decisions quite quickly. Look at the Brexit process, for example. Just sometimes there is not the feeling of urgency I wish we had, particularly when we are dealing with e-health or common cross-border identification needs for all European Union people in internet. There is urgency, and I sense we somehow do not feel it as we should. We must grasp that urgency, because our people and our businesses, they need us to do so. This is how we can turn our competitive advantage of cross-border management system, what we have in European Union. This is how we can turn it into economic and social benefits to our people. Brexit and the populist voices within Europe have made discussions about European Union's future relevant again. After the low point in 2016, I feel it is now safe to state that the EU does have a good future. And I hope we will use this revived faith to insert some urgency into decision-making. Because otherwise, this good impetus might wane again. And I believe nobody here in this room wants that. The public support has risen. And we now have to respond to the hopes of people. We need to think first and foremost of our citizens, and we need to ask ourselves a question. Are we ready? Are we ready to be bold? Are we ready to be future-oriented? Or we stay in our comfort zone and play it safe? I hope that politicians will not opt for the easiest of the roads ahead. A number of ideas have already been put forward by the President of the Commission, Mr. Juncker, and also by President Macron of France. So what should, in the light of these proposals, be our course of action? Yes, we know we need to create jobs and enhance growth. We need to embrace technological innovation and transformation in order to stay ahead of the curve. We need to commit ourselves to strengthen internal and external security, as well as completing the single market with a sustainable social dimension, embrace technological developments of our societies, and increase Europe's competitiveness. We've always had to do all that, but this is only one side of the coin. We need, at the same time, as laid out in President Macron's initiative for Europe, we need to reinvigorate the debate on Europe's future and find ways to meet all these challenges collectively, inclusively, successfully. I understand that quite often big and bold ideas require, on top of political decisions, resources or money otherwise. This brings me to the next multi-annual financial framework, the MFF, which will, because of Brexit, become quite a bit smaller. At the same time, the things we want to achieve, they are numerous. I feel we should approach the MFF negotiations totally differently. We should approach it first and foremost as Europeans. Most of us would agree that there is value added in acting together in research and innovation. Science is far too big for one country to sustain. As I like to say, here even in Estonia, we are a chronic overachiever in capturing R&D finance of EU budget. Even here, the scientists could turn all state budget into research results. There is no doubt about it. We need money for defense sector innovation, as common R&D will in the future deliver us what we want. We want a more common and coherent European defense technology. We need to invest into cross-border infrastructure, be it transport or energy. The same applies for the foreign and security policy. Going for it alone rarely pays off these days. There is also added value on acting together on cohesion. Everybody wins if we reduce differences between regions. But, you know, for all that, we must do something very different. It's not business as usual. We must carefully comb through our current portfolio of expenditure to find and remove as much as possible what is not respecting the principle of subsidiarity as stated in the treaty. Spending from the 1% of the GDP budget on projects and activities which have no cross-border effect should be seriously limited. Because better respect for the principle of subsidiarity, this will create in itself much space for solidarity in our budget. We lack solidarity in our budget. We have new challenges which we can only meet if we act together. We need money for that. The principle of subsidiarity should be our helper here. Estonia, by the way, might not be against raising the budget ceilings as well. But it would be easier to do and to explain to our people if the budget can be reoriented considerably into providing financing to the areas where it truly cannot go it alone. Then there is always the question how to bring Europe closer to its citizens. It's a topic you will be discussing later on. It's an area where you, as politicians of your respective countries, have a big role to play. Responsible national policies can result in the recognition of EU's values by the wider public. It's important to give the EU its due recognition for the possibilities it does offer. Though there has been a boost to EU support in many countries, it is still wavering in a number of member states, and this is often happening because of the political messaging about it, rather than the EU's actions or lack of action. It's very difficult, on the one hand, to criticize the EU and at the same time to claim that it is useful. It's even dangerous. You may blame yourself out of the Union, as we know. The problem is not that people get the EU wrong. It's rather that they get confusing and incoherent messages about it. First, Europe is not and will not be understandable for every citizen. It will also not be directly helping every citizen. What is its role? Its role is to provide stable conditions according to pre-agreed rules for member state politicians to come together and act in the benefit of their people who are collectively our people. These actions, what we undertake at the EU level, these are enablers for member state governments in order to support their aim in providing for their people, providing growth, jobs, social security. We must not blame EU if member states' governments get their redistributional policies like education and health or social support somehow wrong. It is not EU's responsibility. Yet we all know that the EU's reputation also depends precisely on this, on how good member states' own policy making is. This way, our union will always be held hostage to the delivery of the member states' own governments. Even if we all manage somehow to avoid blaming the European Union for our own mistakes, people want to see that EU-enabled actions work in their benefit. And only member states' governments can make them work for every citizen in every member state. Of course, our union is not perfect, but it is short-sighted to blame it for every single problem we face as a member state of the Union of 28, well, soon 27. I do believe that Europe's citizens, your voters, have very high expectations on where we are headed. And you have a big role that cannot be underestimated to play. Europe doesn't start or end in the corridors of the institutions. You have all the tools in your disposal, from accountability to transparency, to continue to fine-tune, to influence the debates ahead, both at home and in the EU. I firmly believe that we all have a lot to gain from the well-being of the Union. And I seriously hope that today's discussions here in Tallinn will contribute to take forward these ideas which have been in the air during this half year when Estonia has held the Council presidency. We have heard a lot of heartwarming proposals about our future, and even if in the technical detail, sometimes even also on the principal matters, they have been different. They have been all carried by the same wish, which was the overarching aim of our Council presidency, to break the ice of negativity about our European Union. So I wish you all a good ice-breaking day here in Tallinn as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. KALJULAID, for sharing your ideas with us. The next speaker will be Mr. Michel BARNIER, EU's chief negotiator for the Brexit talks. He has also been a minister in various French governments. Twice he has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs, also the Minister of EU Affairs and Agriculture and the Fisheries. He has also been the Commissioner for Regional Policy and Institutional Reform, and also for internal market, the internal market and services. The floor is yours, Michel BARNIER.
Good morning to all of you, and if I may, I will switch to French, just to give a proof of the cultural diversity we need to maintain in Europe, and also to be more precise and more concrete, if I may.
First of all, Madam President, dear Kersti, I'd like to thank you for your welcome. And through you, I'd like to thank the Estonian presidency team. They have created both a friendly and an efficient atmosphere the one in which we are currently working, and we have been working since the beginning of your presidency. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Brexit, but you've been working at a critical moment in the history of the EU. So I would very much like to pass on my thanks to you. And I'd like to say to all of you, now after our meeting in Malta last May, I would like to say that I'm very happy to meet with you again. I'd like to congratulate the European Parliament. So you represent the diversity of our 28 countries. And then, of course, we have our friendly and allied countries which are represented here. So there's a great deal of diversity here in the room. I'm very happy to be here again after the Malta meeting. We had Ms. HÜBNER with us in Malta, so I'd like to greet Ms. HÜBNER, and we'd like to show all the support for her in her difficult time. First of all, I'd like to talk about the ongoing debate, democratic debate. And then, along the lines of what Madam President said, I'd like to talk about this new momentum that we are currently experiencing in Europe. We need to maintain this momentum. We need to harness it. And then, of course, I'll tell you a bit about the negotiations that I have the honor of carrying out in your name, in the name of the 27, and with the European Parliament. First of all, a little bit about the ongoing public debate. I'm not a Brussels technocrat. No, I'm a politician. I'm proud of that. I was active in politics for over 17 years in the Parliament, in the French National Assembly and in the French Senate. I was a member of the European Parliament, and I also served in the government of my country. As a politician, let me tell you what I think. I think we need new momentum in the democratic debate. In order to succeed in this debate, well, I've always felt that national parliaments were a key factor. They were a key factor in each of our nations. They were a key factor in each one of our countries. Now, Europe is our common home. And the worst thing we can do is to remain silent. You have politicians, right and left, who are not explaining things. They are using Brussels as a scapegoat for everything that goes wrong. Now, things need to change in Brussels, I know. But the political debate needs to be continuous. It needs to be objective. It needs to be specific. Therefore, I believe that national parliaments and the dialogue between national parliaments and the European Parliament needs to be deeper. So I believe that, and I'd really like to thank you for this in advance, I'd like to ask you to take note of what I'm saying. And I'd like you to go back and explain what I've said in all of your parliaments. And I go to European capitals, and I'd like to thank you for the welcome you accord me in your capitals. So we really need to have this debate, and you, the national parliaments, play a key role in this debate. Now, Madam President, you spoke about the new momentum. In the future, when historians look back on the year 2016, they will see that this was really a turning point, a fork in the road. You obviously had the Brexit vote in the UK, whereby a majority of UK voters voted to leave the EU. You had a change of power in Washington, and a new attitude of a new American president. He has a different attitude to the European project. You had a lot of geopolitical tension. And obviously, the heart of that were the terrorist attacks that affected many of our countries and towns. And then there was the rise in populist trends across the board, more or less. So this is what I found when I set off on this Brexit task that was given to me by Mr. Juncker. There was a sort of collective rise in awareness, a collective awareness of responsibility. And that's why we have seen such unity in the 27, in these negotiations. But as you said, Madam President, there was a unity beyond the Brexit issue. Now, the Brexit issue doesn't pertain to the future of Europe, but we've seen a lot of initiatives in order to come up with a new agenda, a new positive political agenda for the EU. That was the commitment taken up by Mr. Juncker in his State of the Union address. And obviously, Mr. Macron took up a very strong stance on this as well, as have other leaders. Now, we have a very proactive and positive agenda, as requested by the citizens. We are taking note of what isn't working, we've taken note of our mistakes, and we have a lot to do together. Obviously, there's the Eurozone that needs to be strengthened. We need to have a deeper banking union. We need to have a budgetary capacity. The Europeans need to create a more preventative structure. We need to be able to react to internal and external threats. I was very happy of the recent decision by the European Commission to broaden the response to natural disasters by doing this through a European civil protection force. This is in order to react to internal crises, serious catastrophes in Europe and abroad, outside Europe as well. We need to have a real common European foreign and defence policy. This is a subject, Madam President, that you are very much involved in. We need to fight against all of the new threats on the horizon in terms of cyber attacks, for example. Then we need to play our part when it comes to climate change, trade. We need to always fall back on the common good, which is the single market and the social market economy. And within the EU and outside the EU, we need to show greater solidarity. We need to have a humane and effective migration policy and a solid pillar of social rights. That was something that was reaffirmed in Gothenburg just a few days ago. Obviously, things need to change. We need to listen to what is being said around Europe. And we really need to look at the added value of European policies. We need to do this objectively. We need to change what needs to be changed. And as President Juncker said, we need to focus less on small things and more on the bigger things. But one thing is clear in this new geopolitical context after Brexit, and if you listen to what the American president said. There's something that was mentioned by Ms. Merkel a few weeks ago. Nobody is going to do for us what we don't do ourselves for Europe, for our nations and for European citizens. It's up to us to really take our own destiny in hand. Nobody is going to come and do this for us. And it is in this context that I wish to say a few things about these ongoing negotiations, unique, extraordinary negotiations that we are carrying out with the UK as a result of the referendum that took place over a year and a half ago. Obviously, we regret this choice. I've said this to your British colleagues who are here with us today. But we respect this decision. It was a democratic and sovereign choice of the British citizens. It's something we regret, but we respect. And we are implementing this with all of the legal consequences that stem from this, whether they be legal, social, economic, budgetary, financial. So all of the consequences implied in this choice. we are implementing. What is most important is we come up with a solid partnership with the UK, but this depends on three key elements that I'm going to very briefly set out. First of all, we need to strike an agreement on the withdrawal of the UK, an orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom. So an orderly agreement, an agreement with the 27 and the Parliament. So the 27 and the Parliament have been clear on this subject and what this entails. And I do hope in the next few days we will come up with an agreement on principles, and a real agreement. We need to have real sufficient progress in the three key areas where the UK's decision has created a lot of uncertainty and fear even. I'm thinking about citizens. We have 4.5 million citizens that are worried about their status. 3.5 million citizens of the 27 countries that live and work in the UK. And reciprocally, of course, we have 1,300,000 UK citizens that live and work in one or other of the 27 EU countries. So we need to secure the rights of these citizens. We have done a lot, but we need to ensure that we clearly secure their rights reciprocally. And that's why we need a role for the European Court of Justice in that. The second subject is the issue of Ireland. Now, it's not the only place where borders are going to be an issue. Cyprus is a case as well. But Ireland has a very sensitive situation. I'm very well aware of this. And we're not going to do anything that will endanger or imperil the stability and dialogue amongst the different communities in Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement is key. And we need to work together with the UK, which is a co-guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement. We need to ensure that we maintain this stability in Ireland. We don't want to be putting up barriers again, and we need, furthermore, to maintain the integrity of the single market. The third subject is something that affects all of our countries and all of our regions, the regions you represent. In all of these regions, there are thousands of local authorities, farmers, companies, citizens and students that benefit from European policies. European policies that we finance and that we decide on together. The 28 member states decide together. So we have a program from 2014 to 2020. And I've said we are not willing to pay, the 27 are not willing to pay for what was decided by the 28. And so we're asking for the UK to pay its part, to honour its commitments for that period. And they should pay not more, not less. There's no punishment, there's no revenge. No, it's just a question of closing the accounts. So that is the basis of the agreement we hope to obtain in the next few days. And I've been working very hard on this. The moment of truth is approaching. We have a council under the Estonian presidency on the 14th and 15th of December. And I really hope that will be the point where we will see real, sufficient progress on the conditions of our separation. And that would allow me to recommend the opening up of the next two phases of negotiations. First of all, in the transition period, and then on the future relationship. There's another key element of these negotiations. This is to clearly set out that we are not putting into question the single market. The single market is non-negotiable. We need to objectively explain what leaving the EU entails. And this debate needs to take place everywhere, not just in the UK, but in all of our countries. And I think you need to contribute to this debate. The single market is the glue that binds the European nations together. For even before the Treaty of Rome, you had the European coal and steel community and then the common market. And this led to the single market. This composes the four freedoms. These are indivisible. there are common rules for standards, for example, food safety standards, environmental standards, safety at work, product safety. We have institutions, we have the Court of Justice, and we have executive structures as well. The UK knows these rules. We drew up these rules together with them for the last 44 years. And they had a lot of influence on these rules. They had a lot of influence on drawing up these rules. And they are well aware of these rules. So we have taken note of the sovereign decision of the UK to leave the EU. And the UK wants to leave the single market as well, because they do not wish to respect the free movement of citizens. They wish to leave the customs union because they want to be able to negotiate trade agreements internationally. We have taken note of that decision. But we do not accept the fact that the single market and the customs unions, that our laws be weakened as a result of the decision of the UK. The UK will lose out on the advantages of the single market. This is a certainty, a legal certainty. There's no punishment. Many of us regret the decision of the UK to leave, but we do respect it. And as they wish, we are implementing their orderly withdrawal. But we will not accept the watering down of the single market as a result of this. Another key point is the respect of all the rules in the future. You have this these negotiations with our large ally, the UK. Now, this is a very important issue, which affects you, ladies and gentlemen. It directly affects you. The future relationship directly affects you. This is the first time in our trade negotiations, because just as we've done with Canada recently, just as we are doing with Japan at the moment, we're going to have to come up with a free trade agreement with the UK. But this is the first time we're going to have to work in a context whereby we have regulatory divergence, rather than, as we've done up until now, encouraging regulatory convergence. Now, in the case of the UK, we have been totally integrated due to the single market. But now they're leaving the single market, and we're going to have to manage divergence. And we're going to have to avoid the fact that this divergence would become a tool for dumping, for competition against our social rights, our environmental rights, our consumer rights, or against a fiscal level playing field. This is a vital subject for us. This is because it affects all of your countries. It is linked in to the ratification by all of your national parliaments. You are going to have to ratify this agreement. This agreement or agreements will be of a mixed nature. And beyond the ratification by the European Parliament, which is going to have to be ratified by Brexit, this agreement is going to have to be ratified by all of our national parliaments. So I'm very careful as to what kind of public debate we're going to have, because what we need to do is ensure that one way or another we have to keep a level playing field, and we're going to have to avoid regulatory competition. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if, as I hope, we manage to negotiate this orderly withdrawal, if everyone understands that the single market is not up for negotiation, and if we manage to find a way to come up with a level playing field with the UK, well then we will be laying the foundation for a new partnership, a new ambitious partnership with the UK. This partnership shouldn't just be focused on trade with the UK. No, there are a lot more things we can do in sectors like education, research, the fight against crime, defense and security, the defense and security of our continent, Or, and this will be the subject of the conference in Abidjan this week, this will be cooperation in development, especially in Africa. We're not going to wait for the UK to carry out our positive agenda, the positive agenda of the EU. But there are a lot of things we can do together. And obviously, the future of Europe is much more important than Brexit. But in order to have a true, solid future for the EU, we need to come up with a true partnership with the UK. And I'm willing to reply to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barnier. Our next speaker in this session is Ms. Danuta HÜBNER, Chair of the European Parliament's Constitutional Affairs Committee. Danuta HÜBNER, in addition to her position as Chair of the Constitutional Affairs Committee, is also a member of the Economic and Financial Affairs Committee and a member of the Brexit Steering Group and a delegation for relations with the US. In 2004, she had a portfolio for trade and then regional policy in the European Commission.
President, I hope you said something nice. I just didn't take my earphones here, so I don't have to protest yet. Madam President, I would like to thank you very much for your strong commitment. We have known you for more than a decade over there in Brussels for your incredibly hard and difficult work. Thank you very much that you keep your spirit, and it's also important for us in our daily work. And I would like to start with something that a Roman Empire said 2 millennia ago. It was Marcus Aurelius who wrote in his meditation in Greek. He did it and he said that our life is what our thoughts make it. And I think that the European Union has never been something obvious in human history. It did not have to happen, but it came into being following the war, and it was something that arose out of the thought of responsible statesmen who wanted to break the cycle of violence in European history and begin a new chapter of it. And I think that since then, the European Union actually has always been a union of change, and its only permanency is in constant adaptation to evolving circumstances. So I think that also this time around, when we face a lot of challenges, different issues are at stake, that's obvious. But I hope that we just simply will have to deal freshly and with open minds with what history puts as challenges for us and not just complain. Because faced with centrifugal forces, Europe always found the responses, and we have no reasons this time around to fear what the future will bring. But we have to be fully aware that a good future of Europe will not just come by itself, but it will be men and women of Europe made Europe. And I also think that if you look back, each of those difficult moments in our history brought about new initiatives and gave also a push to common undertakings. And there are examples of this. And all the institutions that we treat today as natural, they all have come as a response to some sort of crisis, or at least a feeling of crisis, or a need to push ahead to meet some challenges. And PESCO is a recent example of this kind of change, because it came into being as a response to changing global environment and some turbulent weather across the Atlantic. So I think that the fact that PESCO is a reality now is a testimony to the fact that even if national governments do not always look eye to eye on some issues, they nevertheless can summon up enough determination to see what can be an existing or potential threat to all member states of the Union. Not everybody, as we know, is on board yet, but the door remains open, and that's how Europe works. But we always needed, for all those changes, we needed political cohesion, we needed unity as driver of necessary change to make the Union more agile, adaptable, and responsive to its external environment or centrifugality within. And I think both Madam President and Michel Barnier alluded to this capacity and this need of political cohesion and unity. And Brexit, if I can just spend a second on Brexit, is now this type of development that is testing our level of cohesion and capacity for unity, but also the degree of the will to remain together and to make something positive out of something that is very unfortunate in itself. Will this unity last throughout the process? That's probably still an open question. But looking for the broadest possible consensus that we have to make in wake of Brexit, we have to be clear as to the fundamentals. Even if somebody decides to leave, we remain a community of values and a community of common interests. The European community started without the British, and perhaps it would sound as very harsh, but we will continue without them. And actually, there are others that also want to join us, and in the European Parliament, we will keep some seats for them. Brexit, of course, can take various forms. It can be, as we know, hard, soft, but there are still people who believe, and I met them also yesterday, who still have hope for no Brexit scenario. We have to be prepared, unfortunately, for the worst scenario. That's our duty today. But we have to remember that all legal and all political options are still here. Without doubt, Brexit will make us all smaller, not only UK, also us. Smaller often means in Europe more determined, more focused on the goal, more alerted to threats. The negotiations, Michel said it clearly, are often probably also exhausting, sometimes maybe circular, but also they are a learning process, also about damages and on how to avoid or reduce them. And there are lessons for the UK, but there are also lessons for the EU, I think. The biggest discovery generated by Brexit is a better understanding of what European citizenship means and how fundamental it is for the day-to-day life and also for the future life of generations of citizens of the 28 states. And we in the European Parliament, we listen to all representatives of European citizens, their concerns, their worries about the future after Brexit. And we know that even with the best results of negotiations, there will be unhappiness here and there will be disappointment or sadness, and there will certainly be some citizens who will be angry, and because there will be also turbulences for which we have to be prepared. And we have to do everything that the skillful politicians will not use those difficult moments that might come to turn people against the European Union. Brexit has been driven, it's true, for specifically British factors, but it is also a part of a broader regressive trend in European politics that I am very much concerned about. We are faced with citizens' apathy, we are also faced with lack of interest in the EU affairs. There is also an obvious national turn in European politics. And in national politics, we see also all sorts of cleavages. We see also here and then they're breaking old systems of political parties. We see also new types of engagement in public sphere. But nationalist, populist and separatist movements seem to be on the rise in Europe everywhere. And it is a toxic brew for the future of liberal, compassionate, learning, advancing Europe. The populist and liberal forces have now, I think, an upper hand in mobilization of people of Europe for their views. And it is maybe easy because we have also contributed to legitimate grievances of people. So just one more thing about the Brexit. We have to think that we can face something that I would call a Brexit syndrome. a traumatic situation, the consequences of which will stay with us even if the original event is completed. So we have to avoid this risk. We have to be responsible for avoiding this risk. And I think that this will be a kind of test for all our institutions, for all our projects. So we must make sure that our life as community, united community after Brexit, will be what our thoughts make it, as if I can use again the Aurelius. So it is, we know it very well from our history, that it is our togetherness that makes us strong. We have learned it, I think, by heart. And we also know very well that each member state is weaker individually than the Union as a cohesive whole. And sometimes there is also the cases where we need the power of one to effect the change, but these are very extraordinary situations. The Union, it was clear, and with the previous speaker also, the Union is something that we should improve. It goes without saying. We need improvement in terms of performance, in terms also of transparency of goals and of procedures. This is growing in importance, I think, as an issue. But we also need improvement in communication with citizens, and we also need improvements in communication between member states. But at the same time, we should cherish, if I can say it this way, cherish Europe as something that, if lost, will not be easily replicable, probably not ever possible to replicate. So we should also keep the Union generous, and those who want to go faster and deeper in integration, they have to have the right to do so, provided the process is open to all willing and able to join. We have to be united in completing Brexit, but above all, we have to be united in reforming Union. There is also a sense of urgency in moving forward. That's my feeling. In many policy areas, we need more effective, more efficient instruments to act. Reform of the Eurozone, I think, deserves a special attention. Here we must take seriously the proposals that will come from the Commission in the first package soon, in a few days, I hope now. So let us move fast with these reforms. Let us also help those who, for various reasons, are still outside the Euro. There is a good proposal from the Commission of assistance for those member states. Let also complete the single market. A lot was said also today on this, but make also the single market a place where we have a level playing field for everybody. And we are getting ready to start the big debate about the future MFF. And I agree with Madam President, where she was, with her comments on MFF, but I would like to underline one thing, which is the cohesion policy, which especially in the current context, I think we need a robust cohesion policy, reforming, of course, itself as is the tradition of this policy, but it has to be kept as major instruments for equalizing the competitive field, for fundamental for accelerating sustainable and inclusive growth and convergence, and working steadily for the cohesion of the Union. We need also a new approach to growth. I will not talk about this. It was elaborated quite extensively today. But what is important is that we cannot be consumed in our thinking about the future only by immediate challenges. I think we have to push this fast-forward button and look at the issues through the eyes of the generations that would come after us. In all areas which economic, financial reforms, but migration, digitalization, climate, I think, which will be, all those areas will be paradigmatic for the future. We need solutions on European level, but also we cannot dispense the responsibility for sound domestic policies at national level. And also what citizens were mentioned, and we should not leave them at the end for a comment, but so let me stress very strongly that working out a consent of the citizens for reforms in these often contested, difficult areas, this will be an important challenge we have to cope with. So I know that there's no time, we should leave more time for you, so let me still say that the social dimension, because it is something that is, especially in the context of the summit of Göteborg, we can we've made more commitments, and I hope that what was decided in Göteborg will serve as a compass for a renewed process of convergence toward better working and living conditions among member states. And also citizens, they expect their rights to be observed, and the law space of the Union must be durable and must be transparent. So we have to see also the link between the stable investment environment and those issues related to the rule of law and to the commitment to European values and European law. And citizens also must trust that the Union is on their side when it comes to defending fundamental rights enshrined in international law that all member states have freely joined. And the question, there's no question, I think, that the EU needs to strengthen its visibility, its recognition, its legitimacy. And here we come, if I can say just the last two sentences about the European elections of 2019, because they are approaching very clearly, very quickly, and they will be a primary opportunity to effect all those things, the strengthening of the presence of Europe in people's life. I am happy that the draft contribution of COSAC highlights the 2019 European elections. I also hope that the Estonian presidency, which is extremely involved in finalizing also the work on the electoral law, which will also have to facilitate the decision of the European Council on the composition of the future European Parliament, that those things will create, at least from the administrative point of view, smooth elections. But those elections, I think, will be clearly an opportunity, a moment, I think, we should make the most of for ourselves and for the future generations. They will be the test for us of our capacity to regain our, I would call it, offensive posture after Brexit, and to meet the challenges and prepare for the future. Thank you very much.
Tänan, proua Hübner.
Thank you, Ms. Hübner. Colleagues, many of you want to speak too, and in order for people to be able to do that, I have to close the list of speakers now and reduce the time of speaking to 1 minute. I understand that 1 minute is a very short time, but to make it possible for everybody who wished so to speak, we have to do that. Dear speakers, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the topic of the future of European Union. We can now move on to the debate section and listen what our delegates have to say and ask to the speakers. Let me start with Mr. Van Apeldoorn. The floor is yours.
Chairman, thank you very much indeed. On the future, on the Commission's white paper on the future of the EU, the Commission identifies as a risk of the fifth scenario that it will further alienate, and I quote, parts of society which feel that the EU lacks legitimacy or has taken too much power away from national authorities. But I think that this risk is already there, regardless of the scenario. If we do not address what I think is our most important challenge post-Brexit, which is to finally address the problem of the democratic deficit and enhance the accountability of the Union. Decision-making in the EU does not fully comply with the principles of democratic accountability and transparency. And we'll have a session on this also later today after lunch. And I call upon all delegations to support the Dutch initiative to make EU institutions, especially the Council, to comply with its own transparency regulation. I'd like to hear the panel's reflections on this. Thank you very much.
Aitäh teile.
Thank you. Mr. Lucio Romano.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, everything that we've heard on the future of the EU, I'll have to be brief. We have to come together as a patchwork, a mosaic that forms a large picture, step by step, and move along integration. Brexit, the negotiations are very tricky. They're ongoing. Italy feels it's important that we keep our eyes on signs of life, vital signs of life. Perhaps we could have a common electoral circumscription Europe-wide, so each political family and have a president of the European Commission. It's an Italian proposal. It would not just help clarity in basic political choices, but would involve European democracy, and it would involve citizens too. Final point, bringing Europe together, it's necessary to ensure that we have a state of law, that we have a humanitarian outlook. We have to ensure that we can provide legal and effective alternatives to the dangers of travels over the sea for migrant flows. We want a hospitable Europe. Colleagues, President, it's a humanitarian challenge that we have to overcome. We have to ensure that we give attention and time and space to those in difficulty, and we want to provide a substantial contribution with member states who have to ensure that we bring about these realities. We need networks, we need contact, we need synergy. Thank you.
Herra Richard Hercik.
Thank you, the floor.
Mr. Hercik.
My dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to express my support for the priorities of the Estonian presidency. As far as I see, you are in the right track, particularly in the field of the digital Europe or concerning the outcome of the Eastern Partnership Summit. Let me briefly comment on Brexit. I consider that a fair agreement is in the interest of both parties. A particular issue, notably the selection procedure and the recent decision on the relocation of the 2 EU agencies currently based in the UK, seems to be geographically totally unbalanced. Regarding the future of Europe, I wish to point out that we need a strong and a better Europe, focusing on peace, security and jobs. Peace would also entail advancement of the enlargement process, in particular with the Western Balkan countries. I call on ourselves to go forward with enlargement with a merit-based approach. Thank you very much.
Aitäh.
Thank you. Mr. Stefan Senach.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate the Estonians on their excellent presidency. When it comes to the future of the EU, we're going to have to look at subsidiarity and how it operates to ensure that the EU can also respect sovereignty. So in some areas, we need a more and a stronger EU, but in other areas, we need to go back to more subsidiarity. In particular, where we've seen that a number of legal acts that have mushroomed over the last few years. That's not always a positive thing. It's important that in Rome we decided that we will stay on one and the same speed, and it's good that we had the social pillar further anchored in Gothenburg. We need to fight tax dumping and unfair tax competition, and also social and wage dumping. We need to fight all of these to ensure that we can improve the standing of the EU and its acceptance amongst our people. And also when it comes to free trade agreements. We have discussions with New Zealand and Australia. We need to see whether these are a joint mixed agreements, but that's not a given as yet.
Thank you, Ms. Concepción de Santana.
Presidente, este año hemos asistido.
Thank you very much. This year we had the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, and we made important commitments for the future of the European Union. Now, we've all have to work, and we need to be committed to a safe and protected Europe, a prosperous and sustainable Europe, a social Europe, and a stronger Europe on the world stage. We are currently at a point where Europe is facing its biggest and most complex challenges. We have major challenges in the future. We have to ensure that the economic recovery reaches all of the layers of our society, especially young people. We need to create jobs for the young. We need to manage the migratory flows. This is a major challenge in terms of Europe's capacity to show greater solidarity. We obviously have to fight the terrorist challenge as well that worries our citizens. We've got an increase in populism and anti-European sentiment. And then we have the major challenge of Brexit. European citizens want answers to these problems. We need protection against these threats. I believe that the future of Europe depends on the pro-Europeans, and we need to show solidarity and unity in order to meet these challenges.
Thank you, Ms. Ionetta Gavadia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, we must be clear. The future of the European Union will either be democratic or it will not exist at all. We must not allow the debate about the relaunching of the European project to be hijacked by those who wish to use the mantle of European unification in order to cement an anti-democratic technocracy, the sole purpose of which will be the perpetual enforcement of ever larger dose of neoliberalism and austerity. More democracy means more direct powers to European citizens, more openness and transparency, more accountability to elected institutions like the European Parliament, and more political and economic space for member states, with power devolution from EU structures to national parliaments and even peripheries. After all, the closer power is to the citizens, the more democratic it is. EU must rediscover European values. We must not allow racism, fascism, xenophobia to have future. And unfortunately, if European leaders won't take the message of what is happening to whole Europe, we cannot be optimistic. The real challenge is in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Gabriela Cretu.
Thank you very much, dear friends. It is a huge difference between goals everybody could agree on and the policies chosen to achieve them. Now, we do believe that we need an honest and serious diagnosis of the current situation with increasing inequalities of income, of power, of capacity, of visibility between societies and within societies. The reflection papers show very good intentions but fail in diagnosis. And we could start by changing indicators, because we use indicators with borders in an economy without border. Secondly, we have to strengthen our political will, because lacking legal basis is only a pretext for not doing a reform or another. Three, we need a paradigm change, admitting that single market alone is not enough for solving social and political issues. And finally, a structural change, and I mean monetary system, euro, making it a system serving common interests and not only being a kind of sponge absorbing added value from the margin to the center. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Andrius Kubilius.
Thanks a lot. EU future is not only about future consolidation of EU or future powers or future budgets of EU. It is also about future membership and future enlargement. As we know, Britain wants to leave, but Western Balkan countries, Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia wants to join. And it is good. As we know, it is better to export stability than to import instability. And we can export stability if we enlarge and promise to enlarge. We in our parliament in Lithuania developed an initiative which we call Marshall Plan for Ukraine. It got the general approval recently in the European Parliament, and that is how we can assist Ukraine and other associated members with real and practical instruments. So we are calling other national parliaments to join us in that initiative. From another side, Brexit and new future partnership with the United Kingdom will create new relationship with one of EU neighboring countries. And that is where we hope that this new model of partnership with a neighbor, with Britain, will help EU to have stronger relationship with other neighbors, including Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Tibor Bana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. For many years, the EU has seemed to have a tendency to move its administration towards a centralized decision-making process those transforming a union which originally aimed to ensure the economic and political cooperation of sovereign countries into the United States of Europe. These processes have significantly accelerated since the signing of the Treaty of Lisbon. However, the EU is now facing a decision which will determine its future. The White Paper on the Future of Europe outlines 5 scenarios for the EU by 2025. This means that even the leaders of the EU and its member states don't know yet what the best or most viable way for the EU to take is. In the meantime, we need to solve a number of issues which is necessary for the EU to survive the coming years. We have to investigate the causes of Brexit, defend our borders, as well as tighten the social gap between the western and eastern part of the EU. Regarding the social gap within the European Union, my party, Jobbik, started the so-called Wage Union initiative. 8 Central European countries have joined this initiative with the aim to stop the immigration of their citizens. While prices are almost the same in the different countries of the EU, there are huge differences between wages. If we want to build a stronger and more unified European Union, this problem should be addressed in the near future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Ms. Elvira Kovac.
Thank you, distinguished chair, dear colleagues. I may reiterate Serbia's strong commitment to its EU membership, its devotion to reform processes and to the alignment of its legislation with the EU law, and the contribution Serbia makes to existing EU initiatives, policies, and missions of the European Union at this stage as well. Continuous support and incentives to our European perspective provided by the European Commission, European Parliament, but first and foremost EU member states, are of utmost importance. Even though the enlargement policy at this time is not among the top priorities of the Estonian presidency of the Council of the EU, constant support has still come from Estonian officials, most of the member states, and certainly officials from the European Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament. With a full understanding of recent developments, the priorities that are on the agenda of the EU presidency and the European Union, I must emphasize that the further enlargement process is crucial to preserving the reform momentum and incentives for candidate countries to meet membership criteria. We are certain that the integration of the Western Balkans contributes to peace and security, but also to the prosperity, and the solidarity principle is pivotal for the enlargement policy development, along with the commitment of candidate countries to the comprehensive reforms in all areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Maria Zoa Rodriguez.
Thank you. I'm the European Parliament rapporteur for the European Social Pillar, and I'm also involved in defining the roadmap for the European Union. So far, the social pillar is not integrated in the conclusions, and frankly, I cannot understand this, and I think we should include it. First of all, because it was a brilliant achievement of the Estonian presidency some days ago in the Gothenburg summit. Secondly, because the social pillar must be a compass to conduct upward convergence in the single market and in the Eurozone. Thirdly, because the social pillar is our best way to deal with the upcoming digital revolution. And fourthly, because we need the social pillar to cope with the external challenges. So my plea is to integrate the social pillar into the conclusions of this COSAC meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Maximus Karakapoulos.
Thank you, Chairman. Brexit is undoubtedly a serious step backwards, given the objective of a strong and united Europe. And the UK's exit was not the result of a decision by a part of the British elite only. It was a decision by the majority of the British people, even though it was a borderline result. And this, Mr. Barnier, makes it clear that the European ideal has lost its clarity. We need to give a new momentum to the European ideal because it's now stagnating. There's bureaucracy. We need to emphasize people's role here. There are centrifugal forces all over the European continent. We need a new vision, such as the one expressed by President Macron, the vision of a Europe that will combine economic growth with social justice and solidarity. Finally, let me agree with what President Juncker said. He asked for an end to be put to what's happening with Russia so that we can end up with an honest relationship far from the Cold War approach.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to be brief. We have to do away with the negativity, cut this negative process, as the President has said, and we have to build an inclusive society, as Mr. Nestor said. I agree. We have to stop with the anti-language, as Mr. Nikolaidis, Montenegrin writer, calls it, this anti-European sentiment. And then social union, equal pay for equal work. We need to stop this colonization of the European Union, and I can agree with Madam President. We have to reduce the differences, do away with poverty, and keep the differences that enrich us. For that, we need strong local government.
European Union must be social union and also with strong local and regional autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Soraya Rodriguez Ramos.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, and congratulations to the organizers of this event. On the future of the European Union, we believe its future is in strengthening citizens' rights. More Europe equals more rights. We've gone from this situation of questioning what is the cost of the European social model, because we know, unfortunately, the cause of what happens when Europe is not working well. Totalitarian regimes that infringe our rights. We need Europe protecting Europeans more in social terms, environmental and security terms. And we also need more economic integration, protecting our currency and unifying our tax policies to ensure that we can recover income in a fairer manner and to allow everybody to share from Europe's growth. And that's why we welcome the inclusion of the social pillar in this presidency's conclusions.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Finally, the new majority has a clear mandate to progress on the reforms of the European Union. It's in this context that the French President of the Republic, in his speech at the Sorbonne, announced that there would be democratic conventions held next year in all countries so desiring, focusing on the same questions, setting up a vast debate to identify priorities, concerns, and ideas that will feed into the roadmap for a Europe of tomorrow. It is crucial, as has already been said several times, that citizens be better heard, and that within the structure of a free, open, and transparent debate. So I invite you all to fully participate in this European thinking about our future. But it also means that we, parliamentarians, local politicians, we have to stop Europeanizing all our failures and nationalizing our successes. We need to speak more clearly and identify the challenges and where progress has to be made together. Thank you.
Mr. Andrian Vuksanovic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the future of EU is still on a windmill or various strikes such as Brexit, the migration crisis, security issues, terrorist attacks, social and economic inequalities, but the Europeans still believe that the 60th anniversary of the founding of the European cooperation shows in the enormous will of Europe to withstand the stormy winds of the present. A united Europe is our olive tree that symbolizes eternity and life. The strong branch of the olive tree is the EU enlargement. Parliamentary colleagues, in this crucial time, enlargement can provide a new strength and motivation to overcome all challenges that stand before Europe. we in the Western Balkans are working hard to improve our societies in order to conform to the European standards. Montenegro, as the leader in the accession process, has opened 28 out of 33 chapters, among which 3 are closed. With regard to President Juncker's statement on enlargement, we are certain that we will be able to finish the negotiation process before 2025. The parliamentary is actively involved in this process through the European Integration Committee, which is considering draft negotiation position, monitoring the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peter Omzik.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on a well-organized meeting. I hope that the speakers who gave us a speech can also give us a few answers, because it's very important that we avoid a chaotic Brexit in which we have no deal, and from which the citizens of the UK and the citizens of the 27 other countries will feel the consequences. Secondly, from the beginning, we've heard from both the EU and from Great Britain that the rights of the citizens on either side matter and that we should have an agreement. I would like to know, both from Mr. Barnier and from the UK representatives, what has prevented us of giving these 4 million citizens clarity on their positions. If we keep saying that we do this for our citizens, we should be able to give an answer. And for Ms. Hübner, if she can still give an answer, I would like to know what she meant with all options are still open. Does that also mean withdrawal of the Brexit Article 50 notification? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Simon Stour.
En tant que parlementaire.
As a French parliamentarian, I feel the austerity policies have seriously called into question people's faith in Europe, put a brake on growth, led to mass unemployment and worsened inequalities. Europe needs to provide social protection and ensure a common pillar of social rights, needs to look at seconded workers across Europe. We need posted workers across Europe, rather. We need to look at Europe's role. It needs to look with the next MFF to operate in a very complicated budgetary scenario. So we need to ensure Europe benefits all regions. The proposal of aid conditionality causes problems because it can harm regions and citizens to the detriment of their regions. So we need to review the way in which the operational model of the institution works. It needs to be more democratic. Subsidiarity should come to the fore, and parliamentarians should be more involved in decision-making.
Ms. Lolita Tsigane.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that the biggest enemy of the European future is really ignorance. And we have seen that during the Brexit referendum process that many of the people who took a vote, they actually did not know what they were voting for. And we have seen that when people are exposed to proper information about the European Union and what it does, they actually turn very positive towards the European Union. We have seen it with small and medium-sized enterprises, with biological farmers and many other groups. So I actually would like to ask a question to all of the speakers of what we should do to dispel this ignorance and actually to be able to involve more and more groups in this knowledge of the European Union and what it does, because otherwise we will have a dangerous space where third-party interests can step in and manipulate our knowledge of the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. The Lord Teverson.
Friends, colleagues, can I thank Mr. Barnier for saying that the future relationship between the UK and Europe has to be much broader than the economic one, and that's something we all hope that we will manage. In terms of the citizens, UK and Europe and those European 27 citizens in the UK. That has to be a priority. I absolutely agree with that, and there is great political pressure to make sure that that is the case in the United Kingdom. But we need to make sure, most of all, that we do have an agreement at the end of this process, that there isn't a non-agreement option. If I could just say, as we are still a member of the European Union, how we would see the future, perhaps, or I would perhaps... I think we need to make sure that expansion does continue into the Western Balkans, in particular, for that stability. We need to make sure that European members adhere to the Copenhagen criteria themselves, the rule of law, all of that area. But we most of all have to have the benefits of globalization to all our citizens. And as we found out from the Brexit referendum, the messages about Europe have to be positive and visionary rather than all about the downsides. That's the most important thing, to keep Europe positive and growing into the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Zambige.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Brexit is something that the 27 member states should see as an opportunity to rethink the European Union. A more political European Union which doesn't hesitate to affirm its strength in a world which has never been so uncertain. We need to be strong in international trade negotiations, strong in defence, management of migratory flows, or combating terrorism. A union which also brings to our citizens genuine added value with true tax, social and environmental convergence to ensure that people are brought together too. Finally, a union which speaks to its citizens. Particularly, it needs to speak to young people. We need to invest in the future. Those who were in the Union years ago, Airbus, Ariane. We need to talk to young people, encourage them to go beyond Erasmus. And for young university students, we need an Erasmus that will also cover apprentices. Thank you.
Mr. Titus Korlatean.
Thank you, Chairman. I listened very carefully to the distinguished keynote speakers speaking about the future of the European Union. Not a single word about enlargement, unfortunately. It's true that we have a reference on our draft conclusions, but after reading once again the rather disappointing compromise on the joint declaration of the recent Eastern Partnership Summit, acknowledging once again their aspirations, speaking about European aspirations, speaking about the associated countries, acknowledging their interests and not daring to offer, even on a long-term perspective, a European perspective based, of course, on the criteria, is showing, in my opinion, once again, the fact that we have lost the European political vision a decade ago. I raised in 2014 a simple question publicly. What would have been the fate of some of the Central Eastern European countries, Romania, the Baltic states, Central Eastern European countries, exactly in the moment when the illegal annexation of Crimea took place? What would have been the security fate of the Western European countries without having us at the border? So I want to maybe to challenge the speakers to have some comments nevertheless on the enlargement issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Angleos Votsis.
Chairman, the objective for a safe, prosperous Europe around people should be our main guideline. Managing Brexit, security for the Union, all this will send a message to citizens that we can work together effectively. Managing the migration crisis will also send citizens a message that we can deal with challenges with solidarity. All these are of great importance for the future of the Union. As regards achieving the objectives for a security union, let me point out the need for effective cooperation from Turkey, an accession country, in areas of justice, security, and they should work together with all EU member states. Let me underline the fact that the problems arising in its cooperation with Cyprus taken into account their lack of recognition of the Republic of Cyprus and non-cooperation with Cypriot authorities so that we can promote our security objectives. Thank you.
Ms. Isabella Klotz.
Ladies and gentlemen, a starting point for every debate is the readiness to compromise, but we should cooperate among free people and equal people, and we should never divide the European Union. A divided EU is a weaker EU. It's an EU that moves away from its citizens, and that weakens Europe as a whole. We are against a multi-speed Europe or a hardcore Europe. The EU is for sovereign states, and EU institutions should not move into new competences or use new procedures or instruments without the will of member states. We are very pleased on the Rome declarations. The Polish request to enhance the role of member states and national parliaments was taken into account. The subsidiarity principle is also very important. The idea of enhancing the role of national parliaments should really become true. We have the yellow card system, but the Commission disregards it. And on the posting of workers directive, we saw an obvious case, and also in the winter package. The energy and climate policy is a challenge and a burden for the poorest member states. So big business and corporations and the gas lobby should not impose its policy. We should have here the principle of unanimity, and I ask for it on behalf of the Polish state.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. President. Merci pour votre exposé.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Barnier.
First of all, we argue that Brexit mustn't be a struggle for power. Both parties benefit from a good arrangement that guarantees future cooperation. Brexit is not war. We like to stress the importance of national parliaments to be directly informed about Brexit negotiations. How could this be done other than via COSAC? Article 50 does not exclude a transition period between the conclusion of the Brexit negotiations and the entry into force of a new trade agreement. We argue for a sufficiently long transition period so that our companies can adapt to the new market. Do you share this opinion, Monsieur Barnier? Finally, we argue to abandon the strict separation between phase 1 and 2. Some issues simply cannot be treated separately. How, for example, can we find a workable solution for Northern Ireland without discussing the future trade agreement between the UK and the EU 27? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gunther Grichbaum. Let's continue. It's not working. Microphone not working. Could you use your neighbor microphone?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Okay. Not so easy.
Okay.
Not so easy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Und ich mache
I'm going to continue in my mother tongue. My warmest thanks to the Council presidency. It's all been jolly well organised. As part of my thanks, I would also like to expressly thank Michel Barnier. For us, for the national parliaments, and particularly the national parliaments, he's carrying out the negotiations. He is doing a good job. It's not easy. Even the 27 other member states are not easy to keep together. And, Mr. Barnier, we are not just happy that you're doing the negotiations for us, we are proud of how you're managing them, and it's very good. This morning, we are discussing the future of the European Union. And most of the time, we keep talking about Brexit. But Brexit is the past of the European Union. A number of speakers have said, yes, we need to look to the future. Of course, this is part of enlargement too. We have to provide answers to Macedonia, for example. The accession process has been blocked by a neighbouring country. We have had progress with Montenegro and Serbia, though, but we do have to come up with responses to Albania, for example. Lord Teveson correctly referred to that. We do need to guarantee that we have a state of law in these regions too, and that they adhere to our European values. And this is something that we must continue to refer to.
Kamal Isidor Shaker.
Thank you very much, distinguished Chairman, President, guests. Slovenia strongly advocates a united European Union based on dialogue. We are able to find this amongst the people as well, and in order to have this, maintain this in the future, we need to make sure that we have an internal, external security, making sure that we have economic and social security, and that we protect not just our European identity, but also our national identities. We would like to go back as quickly as possible to the Schengen rules, and we would like to stress that there is a greater advantage in a free flow of workers. We have to strengthen, at the same time, investment, and we have to make sure that we use the cohesion policy and centralized programs of the European Commission, because that will allow us to create jobs and create growth. And this is something that we will have to take into account in the future.
Ina Vassiljeva.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank the Estonian presidency for the organization and for this constructive and effective atmosphere that we are committed to carry through during the upcoming Bulgarian presidency. In the debates for the future of the EU, it is important for us that the EU unites around the common vision of its future, which should imply the deepening and expansion of European integration. In our view, the United European countries must continue to uphold the common European ideas in line with the Roma Declaration, which confirmed the exceptional importance of the principles of solidarity and cohesion as a leading for the European integration. In light of the expected proposal for the new MFF, cohesion policy should be preserved as being in the core of the European Union. It should be based on and focus towards simplification, flexibility, and achieving real effects for the citizens of our countries and for the competitiveness of the European economy. We believe that a new momentum must be created in the process of enlargement of the European Union to the countries of the Western Balkans as a guarantee for stability, economic development, and social progress, both in the Southeast Europe and the European continent as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Oudekki-Loone.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, it used to be common knowledge that EU was built to avoid new wars in Europe. It used to be common knowledge that the common market, free movement of workers and merchandises, and the privatization of public monopolies and firms would have brought about the convergence of poorer member states' standards of living towards the richer states' ones, and better and cheaper products and services for European consumers. The common currency would have meant for European workers earning one more day of salary by working one day less, as the former EC president used to say. EU would have exported freedom, peace and welfare to poorer nations and neighbours. Today, at the end of 2017, all these are shattered delusions. Some say that EU has failed for lack of political integration. Some say that EU has failed for the excess of political integration. Some say that EU has not failed, but they are a negligible minority, usually made up of EU officials. Truth is, the latter are right, but not in the way they mean to be. The EU has not failed, since the EU goals have always been, since the very beginning, to bring about the creation of continent-wide private oligopolies, worse working conditions and wage levels for European workers, and the new imperialist and new colonialist international posture. So, yeah, EU has not failed at the end of the day. Dear colleagues, thank you for the kind intention.
Thank you. Mr. Fabio Massimo Castallo.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, we are living challenging, unpredictable times. And as emerged during the debate, the European Union stands clearly at a turning point. The tensions developed in the system as well as by the system has to be faced and solved, or the risk of a possible collapse of the integration project. The disaffection of an increasingly large part of the European population towards the Union is reflected in a high percentage of abstentions registered at the last European elections. These data are particularly worrying as the largest group of the abstainers are the young people. We should therefore implement adequate measures for effectively and increasingly involving citizens in the construction of the EU. In one word, we have to develop participative democracy tools. From this point of view, the European Parliament has already developed an online platform on which every citizen can easily follow the different stages of every file from its birth until the end and know at what point of the procedure it stands. This is surely a good practice that could be easily adopted also by the Member States' national parliaments, and would help to start and to reconcile the European citizens not only with the EU but with politics in general. This is one of the principal challenges we have to face. As the French philosopher Rousseau said already, referring to the British citizens, the people of England deceive themselves when they fancy they are free. They are so, in fact, only during the election of members of parliament. For as soon as the new one is elected, they are again changed and they are nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gerard Corwell.
Very good. Thank you, Chair. Madam HÜBNER, President of Estonia, and Mr. Michel Barnier. Brexit is a huge problem for everyone in Ireland, but it's a huge problem for everyone in the UK and in Europe as well. We have to work together to sort this problem out.
The problems confronting Europe extend beyond Brexit. There is no doubt about that. We would like in Ireland to see the UK get a good deal as we negotiate a new free trade agreement with the UK. But we insist that we cannot move to trade talks until such a time as the Irish problem, and in particular the Irish border problem, is resolved. There cannot be a border anywhere on the island of Ireland, and we understand that that presents a problem for the single market and presents a problem for the UK as well. But Mr. Barnier, we appreciate you've come and you've seen the border. You know exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about it. As we move to the future of Europe, two issues I would like to address. One is the purchasing power of the population of Europe. We still have a situation where small countries like Ireland, for example, cannot avail of purchasing power of such things as pharmaceuticals, banking services and, for example, insurance. We should be, as a single market, able to purchase any of those things anywhere across Europe. The other thing, very briefly, Chairman, that I'll mention is defence and security. When you mention defence in Ireland, it is immediately interpreted as a European army. That is something that would be unacceptable. Security, on the other hand, to my mind, is more important about the sharing of intelligence across Europe. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Fernando Maura.
Thank you. Very briefly, if I could refer to the budget of the European Union following the UK's exit. Estimates on the impact of the UK leaving the European Union on the EU budget is between 10 and 12 billion annually. Now, when we look at the future, we have to try and cover the budget with the contribution from the remaining member states. We need to reduce expenditure. Also, we need to look at possibly merging both options and see what the outcome of discussions would be. We also need to look at financing mechanisms to determine EU policies in the future, assuming that there would be less expenditure, less money available, and more responsibility on the part of national parliaments. We do indeed need to rethink the EU budget, not just in absolute terms. It's only 1% of EU GDP, after all. But this, I think, is insufficient to ensure we can buffer ourselves against shocks and crises across our countries. We have to rethink the budget also in terms of how it is composed. We also need to rethink the budget when it comes to the common agricultural policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Maria Ivanova.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam President, dear colleagues, on behalf of Ukrainian delegation, I would like to say that Ukrainian Parliament sees its future in the European Union and NATO. And first of all, of course, I would like to thank our Estonian partners for hosting this event, and we really appreciate your warm invitation and welcome. Secondly, we would like to express that our participation will not be occasional, but really permanent and systematic. We are grateful to all of you for your constant support to Ukraine, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, especially in time when we are opposing Russian aggression. Ukraine's efforts has very close relation to our EU inspirations and strategic reforms. I would like to reaffirm you that the course of Ukraine on European integration lies in the same line with a course of democratic changes and reforms. And not only association agreement and visa-free are stimulating us to enhance this process, but first of all, the inspirations of the Ukrainian citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sirkka-Liisa Anttila.
Kiitos puheenjohtaja. Kiitos.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks to Estonia for the excellent way they've tended to their presidency. And I would like to thank you for the interventions we've heard here, especially thank you to Mr. Barnier for his solution-oriented work on Brexit. We have full confidence in you. The national parliaments in the future need to make sure that we will implement the decisions taken by the EU. This has been a major challenge during the EU membership and the existence of EU. The Bratislava Declaration and the roadmap for the future of Europe are a good way of going forward. We also have a lot of tools for preparing the future. We need to prepare the reforms very well and make sure that member states are treated equally. And LULUCF is very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Idoia Villanueva.
Gracias. Thank you. Good morning. Clearly, we're all part of a union, and we need to be realistic to ensure that we have the tools available to ensure that all national parliaments can contribute as well. We also need to combat inequalities because of the untrammeled growth policies followed to date. We need to ensure that we also ensure that inequalities are addressed, because at the moment that's what's hampering our union. We need to promote prosperity for all. We need to ensure that interventionist policies are addressed to ensure that we can address corruption and ensure that corruption that we have all suffered, including in Spain, can be stopped. We need to ensure that our citizens' rights are protected. We needed more unity and not more disunity. We also need to ensure that rights are bedded down and ensure that we have unity both internally and externally. We need to invest in rights and rights that foster alliances to ensure we grow together.
Thank you all. And now I will give the floor back to our keynote speakers in order to comment. We have 10 minutes for all of you together. And first, please, Mrs. Kersti KALJULAID.
Sõna, olge head.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je me lance en français cette fois, juste pour...
Thank you. Well, I'll speak French for diversity and multilingualism. Perhaps next time around I'll speak German. Well, we shouldn't stick to the usual language we speak. We need to move away from old tropes. We shouldn't forget the fact that the political world and demographic crisis and global instability, terrorism, our technology is changing also, and we shouldn't forget that. Our world is overheating as well. So we need to see how our union develops. But we're facing crises, and it's when you face a crisis, I think, that we need to look at opportunities as well, including our Eastern Partnership and our Southern Partnership and technological developments, a social Europe. These are opportunities. The changing work world. That's an opportunity for everyone in Europe. I believe your comments, colleagues, today illustrate that you, like myself, understand the pressing need for action, the urgent need for action, not reaction, but also action. So I hope that we will have a passionate debate throughout today's work. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. President. Michel Barnier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you to each and every one of you for your comments, for your proposals, and also for your points of criticism. Mr. Charakopoulos and Mr. Castaldo, both of you referred to the lessons to be learned from Brexit. I think we need to draw a distinction between the consequences of Brexit, which we manage in our negotiations. Some of these are consequences not just for the negotiations, but will have consequences for decisions to be taken by the 27. Mr. Artsig, on the agencies, or splitting the seats that have been freed up in the European Parliament. Mr. Aura, the budget issues. This is for the future budget period. Will there be 27 of us instead of 28? 10 or so billion euros less, in fact. This is the future budget. But honestly, not just the consequences of Brexit, we'll also have lessons of Brexit. Our concerns, we have to look at the vote, the result, and understand the reasons for abstentions, and the feelings in many of our countries, not just the UK, the feeling of being forgotten, excluded from progress, the feeling of not being protected from some of the consequences of globalization. And we mustn't confuse that popular feeling, which we need to respond to, which we need to listen to, that mustn't be confused with populism. And this is why, above and beyond the necessary reform, the changes that need to be made in Brussels to some policies, in our response we have to include public debate. Mr. Van Apeldoorn, Mr. Cavalier, Mrs. Tsigan, many of you referred to public discussion, debate, democracy. I would just like to say that I was a member of my national parliament. I've also played roles in Brussels, and Brussels has a part to play in public discussion. We have, or Brussels has, the commissioners, we have the internet, but it can't all be top down. In an electorate that is as broad as the European Union, 500 million or so citizens, 445 after the UK leaves, you can't expect it all to be top-down. We need amplifiers. We need people to pick up these discussions and filter it down. And that's what the national parliaments have to do in these discussions. Then we have the local authorities as well, churches, associations. Each and every one has a place and a role to play, but perhaps first and foremost the national parliaments. Mr. Schenak referred to the mixed nature of some of the agreements, New Zealand and Australia. Well, we don't know the content of these negotiations as yet. We have Canada as another example. But these free trade agreements may be partially mixed, and I think that this may be the case in our future agreement with the UK. Well, we do clearly need to prepare for national ratifications thereof too. Jean Bizet referred to some other subjects. Apart from the respect of national sovereignty, we need to create well, how shall I put it, a European sovereignty to act where we can no longer act alone. And this is something we need to think about carefully, drawing a clear distinction between what falls to national sovereignty, even regional sovereignty. Subsidiarity is a key word here. What we need is a diagnosis of the added value of European policies as compared to a solely national policy. And then defence. I know this is a sensitive issue in Ireland. Look at what has just been decided in PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation, one of the Lisbon instruments, never used before. This is a way of reconciling the various sensibilities so that those who want to make progress to structured cooperation can do so, but without closing the door on the others. It's flexible, and I think it's a good step in the right direction. Many of you referred to the single market. Mrs. Cretu said the single market isn't enough. Well, I think so too. We have the four freedoms, Mr. Chaker, we do have the four freedoms, but above and beyond the single market, we need a more human dimension, something more social that reflects solidarity. Danuta HÜBNER referred to this as Commissioner. She was in charge of this. We need a social pillar. We need to reaffirm that, as said by Mrs. Rodriguez. This was a few days ago in Gothenburg. We haven't forgotten the relations with third countries. Mr. Kubilus, Mr. Kolatia referred to these, including those countries that are marching towards accession. There is room for future enlargements. Now, I'd just like to conclude with a word on Brexit itself. My option is not no deal. Nor is it a very bad deal. We are working towards an agreement, but agreement is between two parties. It takes two. And Mr. Omtzigt, when we talk about security for the citizens, that's what we're working on category by category, be they students, workers, retired citizens, citizens with family rights, and we have almost finished shoring up all these rights with a very necessary legal basis, and that will be Article 50 in the treaty. Mr. Lux, some refer to the roles of national parliaments, and yet again, that's why we're here. I think that COSAC and indeed direct dialogue, hearings in each of your national parliaments are a way to involve the national parliaments in these negotiations. Lord Teverson, he said that there is much more to do than just trade. And I think that outside of the EU, the UK will have to discuss with us, will have to talk about future cooperation in security and defence. Isabella Klock referred to unity. It's something that we have to build daily. Gunther Kirschbaum paid homage to the work that I'm doing with my team. Thank you for that. But it's a work that involves dialogue, transparency, respect for the various national sensitivities, and we will continue to do so right through the Estonian presidency. As Mrs. Vasilova said, we will do so in the next Bulgarian presidency too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have picked up just 3 questions to make it as short as possible. And the first one, our Romanian colleague mentioned that nobody mentioned the enlargement. I would like to say that I was very clear when in the context of Brexit, I said that there are those who want to join, and we in the European Parliament, now in this process of thinking what to do with the 73 seats, that practically all political groups are in favor of keeping some of those seats for those who will come. So I think this is on the agenda, even though, as you know, the European, across European institutions, including member states, there is a decision now to still wait for a while with concrete steps of enlargement. But we have not forgotten of our responsibility also for preparing Union for the further enlargement. On Brexit, there was an issue on which I would like to elaborate a little bit. I probably used the wrong word. I shouldn't say options, because options is something you choose. These are just possibilities which exist, and clearly the possibility of which was created by the notification. This leads to what Michel Barnier is doing. I think very rationally, just the aiming at having an orderly exit on time. But we cannot exclude, and this we also debate in the European Parliament, that we cannot exclude at this stage that there will be the possibility of having no deal for various reasons. It's not only that we need to this tango only 2. There is also more. You know, probably that there is a consent procedure at the end. This is European Parliament, and we are doing everything to make the parliamentarians in Brussels feel that we are well informed. We have a very frequent meeting with Michel. We are contributing to the positions. So I think we have developed the feeling of responsibility for the orderly end of this process. But there is also the vote in the British Parliament, as you know, and there is the question of time, which is just shortening with every day. So this risk is there. Now, on the possibility of revoking, you also probably know that there was a very lively debate from the beginning between the lawyers across, the experts across Europe. I think the dominating view is that you cannot just take away on the basis of the treaty away this right to revoke this notification of intention. But we have also made it very clear in our first resolution that this would be very, very strongly conditioned, also requiring unanimity on the EU side. So we don't hear this option at all from the representative of the UK government, but we hear this option from different personalities and also organizations that come. So these possibilities exist, but our option is very clear. Michel was very clear that we have to reach a deal on time, and a deal that would make Brexit an orderly process. And the last issue, which is this ignorance that was mentioned by Lolita. I think what is here, the good news here is that you were given 1 minute and you brought probably all the issues that are important to our attention. And I think there's not major disagreement, so we all more or less agree. But people continue to be confused because we have a lot of signals on different possibilities, different options, different scenarios. So I think that we need a moment where all those different ideas should, as quickly as possible, merge into one vision. I think we need a combination of a vision and pragmatic approach. Vision, because people normally want to know where the leaders, political leaders want to, especially in the context of Europe, want to take them. So I think we need it. And the occasion for this is, of course, through debates. And debates are usually learning process. And we have cohorts of young people organized in many European movements across Europe. I participate in many meetings practically every every month, and we have platforms for debating Europe, which is the best source of information, and at the same time creates this feeling of ownership, because people with whom we talk also provide their ideas and their vision of Europe and the way they would like to go. So I think we are on the way to reduce the ignorance, but it is a big challenge, I fully agree with you, and it is also the challenge for national parliaments. So let's work together. Thank you.
Aitäh. Kolleegid.
Thank you. When we debate the future of Europe and offer specific ideas, it is important to keep in mind that any decision made by us will have a significant impact on the future generations. That is why we shouldn't undertake radical reforms to mend things that are not broken in the first place. We need to keep in our focus the internal market and the 4 fundamental freedoms. We need to do our best to bring the economic and social welfare home to all the European citizens, and perhaps also extend them beyond the borders of Europe. As to the Brexit negotiations, we need to keep in mind that the citizens are expecting concrete results and timely execution of any decision made. What we heard from the debate here is that visions and priorities somewhat differ across member states, but we do share the wish to move forward together and do it in a decisive manner. So thank you very much, our keynote speakers and those who intervened. I also have an announcement to make before we break for lunch. I would ask all keynote speakers and delegates to gather for a traditional family photo in front of the podium here. And I would also like to wish everyone a pleasant lunch, and we will meet again in an hour and a half. That is 1:30.